Bringing occupied East Jerusalem to the map, to the discussion, is very, very important. So I'm really hoping that I could engage you in the data presented to take you a step at a time in the issue of, in the absence of justice, when this is part of the big initiative of the UN, which is strengthening the rule of law. And I'm going to challenge this. How can we really strengthen the rule of law when law and colonialism and settler colonialism was done legally? So how can we do it? What is going on, especially in occupied East Jerusalem? Let me start by taking you into a scene. The street was tense as the residents of the neighborhood awoke to find a new military checkpoint had been constructed between their homes and schools. Israeli soldiers and border police armed with rifles were patrolling the area in a large number. Sharihan and I walked as we have done many times before, conversing with people in the morning hours, with parents, children on their way to school, and neighbors, and observing interactions on the street. And that was part of our study. For the past several weeks, we had been working with teachers and parents to collect handwritten letters from girls. We asked them to reflect on their experience on girls growing up in Jerusalem, what is it like to be a girl in Jerusalem, and what did justice mean to them. As we neared the neighborhood where the school is located, Amira, who was 10 years old and in the 4th grade, was pushed towards us by the soldiers. As we all fell onto each other on the street, Amira said, "Can you see justice? Did you see how they pushed me and pushed us all? As if we are all trash or animals, and they built this checkpoint between my school and my home. 5 minutes walk, and we have a checkpoint. This is justice. My legs hurt, they pushed me with a lot of force. I flew, I'm in pain." Amidst the commotion of Amira's eldest sister and the teachers surrounded us, they helped us all up and tried to see what happened to Amira's leg. They hugged her and tried to comfort her. Her hands were shivering from pain, cold, and fear. But the fact that we were all together, the students, the teachers, Sharihan and I, we sensed closeness and togetherness, though full of fear of navigating the militarized space. We stayed in our corner, watching, talking, and protecting each other. Amira's neighbor, Noor, who is in the 8th grade, began talking to me about the letter she wrote for the study about justice. She said, "I need to write you a new letter. Yesterday, they, the Israelis, invaded our home at night. They scared us a lot. They came at 2 a.m. with dogs that terrify. They broke our world. They messed up our home. And our house is anyway about to be demolished. Yes, we have a demolition order. And they arrested my brother. I will write you another letter about justice in Jerusalem." While Noor was talking to me, Amira, the little one, and in a very loud voice said, look, this is my mother over there." And she was pointing to a woman arguing with the soldiers in our eyesight. "She is telling them, we are children and we must reach school without all this fear." And she continued, "My mom is very clever, and my poor father. My father is hiding at home. He doesn't have an ID card. All his life he did not have one. He was born in our house here, but he doesn't have a Jerusalemite ID. This is justice in Jerusalem. Look, my mom is talking to them, and they are scaring her with their weapons. Look, she is not scared. She is still arguing." Then Amira shouted in a loud voice to her mom, Yamma, mom, I have a math quiz today. Tell the soldiers I have a math quiz." And then, Yamma, my leg is hurting." Huddled together in that cold corner, watching Amira's mother and trying to shield the girls from potential violence on their walk to school, the teachers started sharing their daily ordeal. One explained that the tear gas bombs are affecting her badly, mainly now that she is pregnant. She said repeatedly, "Just look around you. There is no justice." Then Noor intervened. "Am I not a child? What about children's rights? What is justice, Ya Hasra?" Yeah? and Amira jumped and rushed. They are allowing girls to go to school. Let's go, I have a math quiz. I wanted to bring you to the scene because this is one of the scenes that we have collected. What I want to highlight by sharing this brief ethnographic moment from our research process is that the violation of women and girls' lives, the theatrical character of stripping away women's power, dispossession, the violence of the militarized power is not exceptional, but rather invades the mundane space of everyday life. It's at 7:15 in the morning on their way to school. So rather than address violence as an isolated phenomena, let's talk about domestic violence, let's talk about, I hope that we, and looking at it separately, I would urge you, especially when looking at occupied East Jerusalem, our study have forced us to address the large structural factor affecting Palestinian women's access to justice. How do I present the intimacies of violence shaping women's access to justice in a way, and this is where I wanted really you to think with me about the situation, because this is, I was supposed to show it to you while showing you the same. So how do I present the intimacies of violence shaping women's access to justice in a way that is eligible to the United Nations, to the human rights, to the different frameworks? Dr. Abuloghed is here, she could tell us more. When analyzing the everyday embodied realities of Palestinian women navigating structural forms of oppression in occupied territories, how do we really research, as researchers, leave the discussion open to allow different readings of access to justice? How do women themselves envision access to justice in such circumstances? Investigating access to justice in occupied territories required the use of various methodologies. So in addition to a more traditional method in developing the project alongside the women's voices that are the center of the study, we asked young girls to write letters. We asked young girls to draw. We conducted participatory observation with a network of local feminist activists that we called Street Watch, and this is part of what you've seen, School Watch and Court Watch. Learning from and engaging with those that the law defines as Jerusalemite, because some of the women were considered legally as Jerusalemite, and we learn from those that are not, but are Jerusalemite, and I will explain it. Helped me to unpack the complexity of justice in the context of historical and present injustice and violence. Developing alternative methodologies that enable us to research spaces of invisibility, moments of pain, and power, because what we have seen in the scene are really moments of power, are central to my work as a Palestinian feminist. The challenge is doing so amidst a continuous racial project of dispossession and accumulation. A feminist analysis requires historicizing such moments of pain and violence. For investigating current injustices requires an analysis of how power operates in the context and how law is being invoked, used to help the machine of power. Yet much of our work as feminist activists, as lawyers, therapists, human rights workers, revolves around an understanding of violence that is disconnected from the larger history and structure of dispossession. So, the claim, the occupation is not always there, and the issue is not always the land. Why is that when looking at access to justice, we can't connect between the different violences? And what is the political work that is needed in reading here? And I'm still with Noor and Amira's insight, because I believe that the way things are separated, and if we continue to separate justice and violence from history, from land, from law, from economy, from geography, from psychology, from trauma, from fear, we contribute in keeping those moments of violence in power, and I stress on this. Let me take you to FAST. This is the names of my wonderful team. continued the study, and we managed to collect data afterward. The data was compared and analyzed not only to map the everydayness of violence that women face and the way it affects women's access to justice, but also women's counter maps, the everyday strategies that Palestinian women living in occupied East Jerusalem employ to survive and resist violence and navigate the various structures of oppression. The report, therefore, is divided into various sections, and I will share only some of the voices, but I want you to keep in mind the voices of Noura and Amira that started this, that kept on telling me and explaining to me weeks after that scene that justice here is really a problem, for injustice is stripping women. بِعَرُّونَ لَلْعَدَمِ. The concept was that they strip us to the bone. That was a concept that was raised by 12 and 14-year-old kids, and that is very telling. Let's look at the data of Jerusalem. So the demography, the issue of demography is a major issue, and the Israeli regime is using it. The plan is to have 70% Jews in Jerusalem and 30% Palestinians. The actual statistics, according to the Israelis right now, that there is 36.8% Palestinians, which means there's still space for Palestinians to be kicked out. There is at work Judaization of the space, and the Judaization of the space is at hand in different ways. The construction of the Israeli separation wall that have evicted totally from Jerusalem 55,000. 130,000 are affected, especially those that are living outside the wall. We have 3.7 million Palestinians separated from each other. In addition, we have the checkpoint system, 16 checkpoints, but 16 checkpoints are there. There are the flying checkpoints that they could build, like in the case that I have described, and they're affecting the life. The permit system, I will be talking about it, land confiscation that is at hand, and housing demolition. If you will look at the land zoning, and you see the situation in East Jerusalem, you see that the zoning of land is, Palestinians are on only 13% of the occupied land that was occupied in 1967. 30% is called unplanned, 22 is called green area, and 35 is expropriated for Israeli settlement. The issue of housing demolition is a major issue, and what was discussed in most of the letters that we received from young girls. In 2014, 98 structures were demolished and 208 residents have been uprooted. Between 2004 to 2014, 2,028 people have lost their homes, including minors. And this is Silwan area, 88 Palestinian homes in Silwan, in Bustan area in the center of Silwan, which is close to the old city, are under the threat of being demolished. And this is where most of child arrests are also happening. So disconnecting the different issues is problematic, because home arrest, home invasion, child arrest, and so on is at hand. The poverty rate also in Jerusalem, according to the Israeli information, 75.4 Palestinian residents and 83.9 of Palestinian children live below the poverty line, while 21.8 of the residents of the Israelis, the Jews in Jerusalem, and 30.8 of children. And I must tell you that Jerusalem is a very poor city when you compare it to other cities in the area, in Israel. Unemployment rate, you could see 86% of Palestinian women are unemployed. The legal status is a major issue. Under the Israeli law, Palestinians living in occupied East Jerusalem are permanent residents. Those that are lucky are permanent residents, rather than citizens of Israel, and their residency status is conditional upon their proving that their center of life lies within the Israeli defined municipal boundary of Jerusalem. Consequently, the residency status can be easily revoked. Yeah, and you could see here an article that was published in 2015 in the midst of the second section of the collection of the data, where Netanyahu was discussing revoking residency status for Palestinians in East Jerusalem. And if you look, we're talking here about 90,000 Palestinians living in East Jerusalem might end up losing their identity cards. So the Israeli ID card and permit was introduced in 1948 following the Nakba and the census in November 1948. All Jews, whether residing in Palestine prior to 1948 or arriving from elsewhere, were automatically granted ID cards. The Citizenship and Entry into Israel Law of 2013 temporary order was approved by the Knesset in March 2007. It prohibits the Palestinian spouses or children of Israeli citizens or residents, from receiving permanent residency status in Israel or Israeli citizenship. So this is an occupied city, but the people there are considered residents. Those that are residents, of course, there are those that are not considered residents. But if they marry someone, they cannot give the residency, grant the residency to them. The citizenship law was originally passed, declared that it was not only a violation of Israel's basic laws, but also constituted a violation of Israel's duty as a state signatory to both the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR, and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. Let me tell you the story of Hanan so that you'll understand the effect of such a law on the lives of women. Hanan was the director of one of the women organizations, a Bethlehemite married to a Jerusalemite who has a residency status. The Israeli citizenship law and the ID system affected the most intimate spaces of her life, her own bedroom, as I've talked about previously in my writing. Hanan, as many women we interviewed, explained that they can't register their own children in their own IDs, which means if she is crossing a checkpoint, if she is going somewhere, she cannot prove that the kids that are with her are her own children, or even manage to issue birth certificate for them. She cannot get a driving license, so she needs her husband to drive her to work and drive a car in Jerusalem. Yes, she can do it in Bethlehem. Her mobility is under surveillance 24/7. Reaching work is a problem. Reaching family, university, and hospital is also an issue. Riding with her husband in their car is a violation of law, as he might pay a high fine and his driver's license can be revoked because he is sneaking a West Banker. Then the process, the payment to the lawyer to apply for a family reunification in order to get the permit to stay, is very costly and uncertain. But what will happen to Hanan and her two children if something will happen to her spouse? What will happen to her house and to her case? Manal lost her husband at the age of 32 and needed to apply annually for an official permit to allow her to stay in Jerusalem. She was living with her husband for 16 years with a special humanitarian status code, based on the Citizenship and Entry law, the Israeli, yes. Manal's initial request for such permit took forever. Then a human rights organization interfered. After 20 months after the official application, that was the approval letter, and I quote, "The special humanitarian reason is the fact that you had a permit to stay when your husband was alive. And now, following his death, you remain the only natural guardian for your children. The permit is valid as long as the center of your life is in Israel, which is occupied East Jerusalem, and you are not married to a resident," so she is not allowed to marry, even not a resident, "of the area, or as the second wife of a bigamist man." They hypothesize that she will be married as a bigamy. When renewing the permit every year, the center of your life and your personal status will be re-examined. In addition, and listen to this, a security and police-oriented investigation will be conducted, and this is an official letter. So Manal's current legal and psychological condition is thus one of living in constant uncertainty, as her permit might be revoked at any moment. But this is not enough. In a chapter that I titled "Can the Master's Tool Dismantle the Master's House?", the ID problem added to the policies of housing demolitions, eviction, poverty, and the daily political violence and arrest further complicated women's accessibility to justice. Women's lives are penetrated by the power of law, yet are consistently stripped of their power before the law. In cases where some try to achieve power through the law, for instance, in some cases of domestic violence where women were entitled to some form of protection from the state, this created new layers of violence, new modes of violence. As women explained, the state infiltrated into the very intimate spaces of their homes and of their family lives. I will share with you two cases. To protect Nisreen from the unending abuse of her spouse, the welfare department in East Jerusalem called the Israeli police, and they in turn came and took her to a shelter. After realizing that she does not have a Jerusalemite ID, the police moved her to a shelter in the West Bank. Nisreen was safe in the shelter, but she lost her right to see her children. I met Nisreen in the prosecutor's office in Ramallah, 7 years after the saving by the Israeli police. She was begging to find a way to see her daughter and son. She said, and I quote, "When I left him, my baby was 4 months old. He is now in the 2nd grade, and I can't even hug him. I can't reach Jerusalem. The Sharia law could not help me. I came here to the prosecutor's office. I feel my heart is amputated, totally amputated and dismembered. مقطعة تقطيع والحسرة مقطعة قلبي." She concluded, "I wish the police and the welfare never interfered. They saved me, maybe, but they killed me for sure." Rawan was 9 years old when she was raped. When her family learned about her rape and managed to know the rapist, they informed the Israeli police. The police managed to locate the rapist, but when they learned that he does not have an Israeli ID, they explained to the family that according to Oslo Agreement, it is the responsibility of the Palestinian Authority to follow up with the case. I have interviewed the welfare officer that dealt with this case, and he was so frustrated, an Israeli welfare officer who is a Palestinian from Israel. He was so frustrated, and he said that the situation went so hard, and he kept on telling me that the fact that there is a law doesn't mean that we can use it to support women in accessing justice. And his words was, he ended while explaining that مسرحية بدها تمشي. It's a show and the show should go on. But they never managed to capture the rapist or investigate him. The Palestinian Authority cannot get into Jerusalem to investigate anything, cannot collect evidence, cannot conduct any investigations. And if the Oslo Agreement is helping this show, as Saleh stated. The situation of education was a major issue in the chapter that in our study when we looked at the girl child. I must say that the first thing that came out when I asked about justice, and especially before the situation of kidnapping Muhammad Abu Khdeir in July 2015, and when we went back to the field, was a letter from a girl that talked about love under occupation. And this is the first letter that opens the chapter on the girl child, because they wanted to talk about love. And she talked about how she cannot even love because she doesn't know if he will have an ID or not. She doesn't know if he will end up being imprisoned. She doesn't know if her house will be demolished. She doesn't know if the family unification will be accepted. And all the issues that are so political were in this love letter. So the question is, how can you love under such conditions? So let alone how can you use the law under such conditions. But the girl child, really the discussion with the girl child, the entire focus was on education. And just look at the situation the issue. Letters that were collected from schools throughout East Jerusalem and all the observations reflected political and justice issues. Letters discussed insecurity over navigation of their militarized spaces, especially reaching school, the potential loss of home, imprisonment, girls' ability to marry, to build a future, to find a job, to reach or to be able to dream. Indeed, one of the primary challenges raised in discussion with girls was access to education. While the sex desegregated data is in short supply, recent studies demonstrate that Palestinian children in occupied East Jerusalem face severe obstacles in accessing their right to education. Despite the fact that Palestinian students comprise 40% of all students in Jerusalem, according to the ACRI, the Israeli Civil Rights Association, and I quote, only 41% of Palestinian children are enrolled in municipal school. And there are three systems of school. There are the Waqf school, the private school, and the municipal school. Municipal school under the Israeli control. And that creates another maze of injustice. Indeed, there are, as you see, 1,000 classrooms in the official municipal education that are a shortage, and a great number of those classrooms being defined as inadequate according to the Israeli Ministry of Education. The school, what is called here dropout rate, and I refuse to accept this definition of dropout because it's deprivation of education. It's not the girl decided not to go to school, she's not in Amsterdam and she's running away. This is a total difference. So the concepts that are used usually, dropout rate is not exactly dropout. We need to revisit it as well. Is staggering, 26% for 11th grade, as you can see from the chart, and 33% for the 12th grader. Far above the national average and 4 times higher than that of the Jewish population in Israel. In addition to structural inequality depriving Palestinian youth of their right to education, since 2011, Israel has imposed a curriculum that erases all references to Palestinian history and culture in an attempt to impose an Israeli identity on Palestinian youth. And so discussions and meetings and encounters and focus groups with girls revealed the embodiment of this violence that resulted in a sense of dismemberment, like they can be but they cannot be there. Young girls discussed the way their legs were running, especially on their way to school, while their hearts were frozen in fear. This is what they said. They talked about their eyes being open, yet unable to see anything due to the traumas of tear gas, or seeing soldiers arresting and beating their friends and siblings. They explained that it's not about justice and access to justice, but rather their own survival strategies under the maze of violence that they are. And if we go back to Amira and Noor, and their concept of they strip us to the bone, Noura insisted that the laws here are all, I'm quoting, are all racist laws. So how can we maintain our dignity? No human would agree to live without karami, without dignity. And these are the girls' voices. Now, if I look at another aspect that was very much mentioned is the issue of sociocide, or the issue of the undocumented children. And this is according to the Israeli National Council for the Child, which is usually, I point to it and people do not understand, 79.9% of undocumented children in Israel, Israel includes occupied East Jerusalem as in Israel. And we're talking about 124,607 Palestinian children, girls and boys in East Jerusalem with no documentation. And that raises lots of questions. What school do they go? What about health clinics? What about accessibility, leaving, permit system, marrying, life? There are so many issues that are under. Child arrest is another major issue that is affecting Palestinians. Just look at the allocation of budget, mainly when we're talking about kids and girls. Playground, you can see 1% is investment in occupied East Jerusalem, 99% In West Jerusalem, again, sports facilities, you see the discrepancy in the budget allocation. And mind you, much of the budget, at least according to the Israeli municipality, I think 38% of the budget of the Israeli Jerusalem municipality comes from fines and payments from East Jerusalem, yet the investment is around 11%. So we need to keep this in mind. Okay. We are orphans. This is a section that looked at working women and the issue of feeling that in Jerusalem a working woman is an orphan and a woman in Jerusalem is an orphan, or that, as they called it, it's enslavement. And teachers have, especially in private schools and in municipality school and Waqf school, discussed being situated under a constant surveillance and in the situation of being orphaned. They don't know who to go to. So if they're not being paid, if they're being abused, if they're being harassed, if the curriculum is not there, if they are afraid on their way to school, this situation is really, there is no address, no law that could help them. They talked about embedded racism. We are always treated differently. Those are teachers that are working in the Israeli system, in the Israeli municipal school system. Yeah, being a teacher in the Israeli system means that your political behavior is under constant scrutiny. We fear talking in classes. Well, the teachers, when interviewing teachers in classes, they discussed the fact that even when a child was killed a day before and they came to school, they could not even discuss it with their neighbors and with the kids at school because this is a municipality school and they will be kicked out of their jobs. Now, in other schools, in private schools and in Waqf schools, and the Waqf schools are it's the Palestinian Authority schools, their discussions are different, and there the issues that our women facing and workers and teachers are facing are different, because if they do not pay them, if they abuse them, there is no system to go and complain to, because they can't go and complain to the Israeli legal system or to the Israeli labor court. They cannot. So the question of what happened to women under a condition that there are so many different laws, there is the Palestinian law, labor law, and there is the Israeli labor law, but where to go, how to do it, what language? The question of language was a major question, especially when talking to workers. I have interviewed workers that are working cleaners in different places, Hadassah Hospital, Hebrew University, and so on. And again, the issue of language was major, and the issue of political violence was always raised. For example, receiving letters in Hebrew or signing them to get a salary, and they don't know what they sign on. The political violence women talked about, can they jeopardize their employment? So the supervisor tried to solicit information. So he gets me to work at the hospital, but he wants more information about my family in Ras Al Amud or Jabal Al Mukabbar. An additional issue that came out when we're talking about women living under emergency rules with no protection, and this is what they kept on talking. Fearing to use the Israeli employment law. There was one case of a Palestinian that was employed by a Palestinian university, but she is Jerusalemite. And the question is, which law can she use? So she went to the Palestinian court, but she was unemployed and nobody was paying her unemployment. And I have followed this case, and I think that the Palestinian court have saved her, knowing that she was part of the study. And she's a professor of microbiology or so. Exploitation in the workplace, not paying salaries, not paying on time, being hit, being sexually abused. That was really exploitation, abuses on the bus, on the street, especially women that are wearing the veil were hit and abused on the way to work, and they could not even talk about it. The ID card being abused by employer, because if the employer would know that she has a permit but she's not coming on time, that was. And the main concept that were there in discussions with workers, with women, with teachers, with cleaners, with so on, and with fallahat, with women that are selling produce in the old city of Jerusalem, is that, look at us, they are treating us like slaves and we are orphans. And the concept of being orphan in Jerusalem was really major. The issue of political violence is a major issue that the last chapter of the study covers. The unspeakability of the political violence was evidenced when discussing really invasions, evictions, and so on. And this sense of enslavement and total inaccessibility to right, being orphan, was further crystallized in this section. The issue that came out very strongly when talking about political violence was, number one, settlers' violence. The issue of settlers' violence was really major. That should have been before. And let me share with you the statement of the voice of one girl. Last week I was running from them after they pushed me and my sister twice, running from the settlers. I ran from one place to the other like a mouse, hiding from a big cat. And they were speaking Hebrew, saying things, plotting to catch us from different spaces, exactly like a little mouse. And they jumped in my face. I felt all my body shivering. And by the time I reached home, all my face skin had a very bad rash. A teacher in one school in the old city also told us that the settlers living around the school called the little girls jukim, or cockroaches, it's in Hebrew, yeah? and use various tactics to scare them. Teachers explained that creating troubles with Palestinians in neighborhoods, especially the old city and Silwan area and Ras Al Amoud, were major because the settlers are living in close proximity to people. And they forced body searching and harassment, and especially with girls, they do it a lot. The situation also brings Palestinian boys to fight with settlers and harass Palestinian young girls. They order them to stand in one space, go in specific directions, and cause much troubles all the time. The embodiment of violence, turning women and the young girls' bodies into captive flesh, was mentioned in the writing of a young girl, as well as the discussions in most of the focus groups, mainly when explaining the way women's bodies are treated following an attack. The fallahat, the produce sellers, discussed, and we interviewed 19 of them, discussed the way men are humiliated in front of women when they are asked to take off all their clothes, and while doing this, being hit and cursed by the Israeli soldiers. One fallaha explained, and I quote, "The past week they humiliated so many men here." It's Damascus Gate. "The last one was a young man, the age of my son. They asked him to take off all his clothes, all of it. When he was taking his socks off, they kept on hitting him on his head, and he kept on falling. And we all of us, men and women, were watching, did not do anything, and in a minute they started using live ammunition and shooting in the air." Maram, that works as a cleaner in an Israeli institution, explained to us, "Hasra, our life is hasra, not justice. It's agony. On my way to work, they abuse me. They call me, they can see I'm Palestinian. They humiliate me. Then I clean their offices and bathrooms. And at night, they invade our homes. And my 16-year-old son is in prison now because he fought with the settler. Today, they sent us a letter that our house will be demolished. They want to bring settlers to our neighborhood. They build their homes and demolish mine." Now, this situation exacerbated because the last period working on the study was the issue of the withholding Palestinian dead bodies. Enfleshment and dismemberment was strongly apparent in the data collected from bereaved women, mainly those that needed to await the release of their dead children's bodies for months due to Israel's recent reinitiation of a policy of withholding the bodies of Palestinians killed by Israeli forces or settlers while accused of carrying out terror attack. As a result, families' access to justice was affected in number of ways. They were denied the right to a comprehensive investigation into the death of their loved ones, the right to a dignified burial, and the right to mourn the dead, and experienced, in many cases, severe traumas. One of the mother, Hassan, stated, "They live on our flesh, blood, and death. Withholding the dead body of my son, preventing me from holding and hugging him for the last time, and keeping me on hold for so many months, killed me. My eyes can't close For when I do so, I hear him begging me to release him from their prisons, from their refrigerators. Their state is built, their power is constructed on our dead bodies, our suffering flesh, our uprooted life. How can they imprison dead flesh if not to suffocate and kill slowly the living bodies, to set our hearts on fire? As Hassan's words relate, bereaved mothers' inability to access justice goes beyond being able to implement legal ruling on the return of their children's bodies or to investigate the conditions in which they were killed or achieve legal resource. The injustice inscribed on Hassan's body and heart not only dismembered her from her own son and from dignifying him while dead, but also dismembered her, as she said, from her own heart, from her own body. A last and major issue that came across in discussions and interviews is that women kept on saying, إحنا أجساد أسيرة, we are captive flesh. إحنا أجساد تحت الحصار. Captive flesh. Both letters, and letters of 12 and 14 and 16, it was really amazing to see it, and requires so much thinking, because the letters and the various discussions referred to the issues of the bodies that are made captive. And as a young woman finished her letter by saying, even death become ungrievable. I will try to end by saying that, I know that this is part of a big project by the UN, but I would ask you to really think about the limits of law and how law can strip people of power, and what can we do that goes beyond the law? What can we do if and especially in a situation whereby this city, the city that is occupied East Jerusalem, is considered by Palestinian women as an orphan, that they are orphaned and nobody is really capturing what goes on. Since the violation of rights, the rights to a family, the right to education, the right to safety is done legally, yeah? In addition, the political situation, the issue of Oslo Agreement. The Oslo Agreement is what brought occupied East Jerusalem to a condition of being an orphan. So this is orphan city, and this is the capital of another state, which is like this multiplicity of vulnerabilities that are inscribed over the bodies of Jerusalemite women is really requires further thinking. And the question of intervention, what is intervention? What kind of intervention? How do we intervene? Being critical to colonial intervention, but in cases that we need the police, what do we need? Should we call? Shouldn't we call? So there are so many questions of what is intervention under such condition. And of course, how can we activate potential resources? Because Palestinian girls and women have taught me a very good lesson. In every single aspect, women never cease to amaze me. They always found ways to navigate the system and to screw the system in many ways. So the question is, how do you really navigate the system under such conditions in this maze of injustice? And I think I'll stop here, and I hope that we will keep on thinking of ways to challenge this absence of justice. Thank you.